Hello, I'm the Nerdy Chaplain, and this is Athos, who at the last second decided he was gonna make a visit. I'm the Nerdy Chaplain, and this is an Interfaith Chaplain Explains video, and this topic is the prosperity gospel and the word of faith heresy. In a country with freedom of religion, the word heresy is hardly used, and it takes on a different, more narrow meaning. Bye, Athos. Way back when, countries would have a state or official religion. So heresy could be anything other than that religion or tradition to an actual perversion of the faith it claims to be a part of and how it presents itself. And in this day and age, it is not so common a word. I mean, even Catholics have officially stopped considering Protestants heretics. But there is one major movement and theology that claims not only to be Christian, but the only proper path of Christianity, and that the rest of Christianity from across the spectrum agrees it is a heresy. There is another minor one, but that one requires its own video. Anyway, it is the Word of Faith movement, which is a type of prosperity gospel. They have been popular televangelical groups with recognizable names leading them, like Oral Roberts, Reverend Ike, Jim Baker, Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, Benny Hinn, Bishop Eddie Long, Joyce Meyer, Paula White, and Joel Osteen. Let's start with the foundation, prosperity gospel theology. It holds that physical and spiritual realities are one inseparable reality. That means that the state of your spiritual self is reflected in your physical self. So if you are poor or in need, there is something wrong with you spiritually. They believe that Christians, or who they believe are Christians, have been given power over creation because they were made in the image of God, and therefore, through something they call positive confession, they can have dominion over their souls and the material objects around them. So, wealth becomes a blessing from God, obtained through this positive confession, visualization, and, of course to them, donations. The Bible becomes a faith contract between God and the believers. God is faithful, so believers must fulfill their end. This leads to that positive confession thing, where believers claim whatever they want from God simply by speaking it. It is like God is a cosmic cash machine to them, essentially. To them, the Bible has promised earthly prosperity for the believers. This depends on their non-traditional or heretical interpretations of a verse in the book of Malachi regarding tithing, the parable of the talents, John 10:10, Philippians 4:19, and 3 John 3:2. Because of these misinterpretations, prosperity gospel casts itself as the reclamation of true doctrine and part of a path to Christian domination over secular society. Sounds rather sinister to me. Alright, so their churches heavily emphasize tithing. That's the 10% of your income and also giving. And while they nominally run social programs, they tend to actually be fundraisers. They are complete takers. They take from people. They reject both small c congregational and small p Presbyterian polity. So their congregation cannot vote to decide on how things are run, how the money is spent, or have any role in deciding church operations. They favor a more authoritarian or small e Episcopalian polity, where the leaders claim divinely bestowed authority. That's the holier than thou stuff. This is also used in prosperity gospel to justify the high salaries of their leaders. And I cannot bring myself to call these people pastors. So I'm calling them leaders. All right. Now, the word of faith, guys. This is a prosperity gospel movement, and it has its particular flavor. Their teachings, in no particular order. Soterology, that's the theology of salvation. To them, salvation was won by Jesus on the cross, included earthly wealth and prosperity for believers. And so on the flip side of that, material poverty becomes a sign of sin. It is God's will that believers enjoy good health, financial success, and a blessed life. Believers have to give to the leader and to the church to gain material compensation from God. Yeah, they're giving to the leaders, not to their neighbor. All right. And then the covenant with Abraham is a means to material entitlement. That word should really make people run, entitlement. A believer's physical, emotional, financial, relational, and spiritual prosperity is determined by how skillfully the believer manages their covenant with God. So prayer is used as a tool to force God to grant prosperity. Hi, Athos. All right, and then there's faith healings. They did come out of the Pentecostal branch of Christianity, so that's completely in line with where they came from. Hi, Athos. Or hi. You want to come up and say hi again? He wants me to pet him some more, but... All right. Their general theology and theodicy. That's God and evil. Suffering comes from Satan. So if someone is not experiencing prosperity, it is because they have given Satan authority over their lives. And God will do nothing. God will not do anything except when a believer invites God to do so. They also believed that Jesus and the apostles were wealthy, based on their observations that Jesus had the ability to travel without apparently working, references to Jesus and the apostles owning homes. Jesus had a treasurer, Judas. Jesus hung out with the upper echelons of society. Jesus' miracles of abundance, like the feeding of the 5,000 and Peter's net full of fish. And lastly, the apostles' businesses or work. Believers have the same creative power of God. More of the positive confession stuff. Teaching that faith is a force, but not the cool sort of force in Star Wars. Surprisingly, they do have the responsible teaching to warn against negative confession, that what they say can have power to harm. That's the one good thing I find with any of their stuff, personally. Believers are little gods, but that's with a small g, because we are made in God's images. God's image. Now, here are some signs to determine if you are dealing with one of these heretics. There is an absence of dealing with any of the hard parts of the Bible. So no tensions, no doctrine of self-denial, or doctrine of suffering. Remember, Jesus did not say following him would be easy. He made it very clear that it would be hard to follow him. There will also be an absence of serious biblical exposition. They just won't go too deep into it. So it's the exact opposite of my sermons that are on this channel. Their leaders live exorbitant lifestyles, and their message focuses on the self and minimizes the greatness of God. So why is this heresy so popular? I was just in Walmart earlier today, and in the bargain bin of books, there's all these Joel Osteen books. I think it was Devotion for Couples, and I was just getting really annoyed, though it did make me happy that stuff was in the bargain bin. But anyway, hi Athos. So why is it so popular? Well, it makes following what they claim to be Jesus into an easy thing. It's a laziness. They focus on living the good life with prosperity and helps them to ignore the suffering of others. Like, just put some blinders on. Okay, but ignore those other people who are suffering because they do not deserve help. It's giving them license to be selfish. It's that whole, if they are not experiencing prosperity, it's evidence that they have a sin. It's like promising free money or free things, luring people in, and then taking everything they can. Hi again. Kind of like a drug dealer, giving a free sample and then creating a new addict. If you're going to come up here, just come up here, buddy. Their leaders live lavishly, modeling that lifestyle as part of that lure. To the impoverished, it gives the hope of upward mobility. To the affluent, it gives them a religious justification for accumulating and hoarding wealth. Because true Christian doctrine encourages giving, and this heresy lets them keep it. It is essentially a religion for the selfish, led by a used car salesman or a snake oil salesperson with an intoxicating sales pitch. Athos has a girlfriend that he's making eyes with over there. But what does the Bible really say when compared to this heresy? In Word of Faith, the believer is told to use God, while the Bible teaches that God uses the believer. Word of Faith teaches that the Holy Spirit is a power to be put to use for whatever the believer wants, while the Bible teaches that she enables the believer to do God's will. The prosperity gospel actually resembles the sects that infiltrated the early church that Paul warns about in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Men of corrupt mind believed godliness was a means of gain, a desire for riches, but that is a trap that brought them into ruin and destruction. That's verse 4. Verse 10 says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people, eager for money, have wandered from the faith." End quote. Sounds like there was some profiteering happening back then, like what Jim Baker and others have been repeatedly accused and even sued and convicted for. Word of Faith likes to think that Jesus and the apostles were wealthy, when in Matthew 8:20, parallel Luke 9:58, tells us that Jesus had no place to lay his head. Luke 8:1-3 tells us that Jesus' earthly ministry was financially supported by a group of woman believers. And the early church could not have existed without the woman believers as well. If riches were a reasonable goal for the godly, wouldn't Jesus have pursued it? In fact, his whole life is demonstrating that wealth and spiritual blessings are not connected. In fact, the only time Jesus got upset was when so-called believers put financial concerns and money ahead of the well-being of their neighbors. He went and flipped some tables. Now, maybe GOP Jesus, if you've seen those memes, would agree with the spiritual blessings and wealth being connected. Also, Judas was the only disciple who was concerned about money. And I'm actually surprised that they invoked Jesus as a positive example, though that opens a whole other barrel of monkeys for a later time. And one other thing, and Jesus hanging out with the upper echelons of society. So when I serve as a pastor of a church, I would never see, I never consider myself part of the upper echelons of society. But when I serve in churches, you, by virtue of your role as a pastor, you end up dealing with the town leaders or the what would be considered the upper echelons of society, the business leaders, the political leaders, the philanthropic leaders. So I mean, it comes with the role, but no one would ever mistake me as actually being the same as them. But back to this, back about the apostles and Jesus being wealthy. Not just Jesus, but all the disciples and the Apostle Paul and many of the early Christians, without a doubt, were spiritually blessed, but lived lives not of wealth, but of suffering. All right, positive confession. God as the cosmic cash machine. Faith as a formula used to manipulate God into getting what you want. They demand favors from God, stated positively and without wavering. And God is required to answer. So faith is not a submissive trust in God. And it's all about what is said, what is spoken. Sounds a bit like witchcraft or spellcraft, or something you'd see Sam and Dean Winchester doing in Supernatural when they want Crowley or whomever to show up and do something for them. Now, to clarify, as an interfaith chaplain, I recognize that Wicca and paganism are their own belief systems, and I am not commenting on or making judgment on them when I say witchcraft or spellcraft in this context. They have their own rituals that fit into their belief system. As a Christian, I may disagree with it, and as a Congregationalist, I hold to freedom of conscience. So it's their decision, and so long as we respect each other's autonomy, I'm fine with that. My commentary here is that from within a Judeo-Christian context and belief system, which the Word of Faith claims to be within, witchcraft and spellcraft is forbidden. And it also feels like they're treating God like a pet. Next, Paul in Ephesians 5 tells us that covetousness is idolatry, and he instructs the believers to avoid anyone who brings a message of immorality or covetousness. Idolatry is forbidden by the Ten Commandments, as is coveting stuff in general. That's most of the second half of the Ten Commandments right there. So believers really shouldn't be treating God like an ATM. All right, furthermore, in Luke 12:15, Jesus warns us to be on guard against all kinds of greed, that a person's life does not consist in the abundance of their possessions. And in Matthew 6:19, Jesus warns, do not hoard earthly possessions where moth and rust can destroy them or thieves steal them. And this sentiment is further reinforced for the early church in the letter of James, my favorite non-Pauline letter, where he says that we do not even know for sure what tomorrow brings. So don't be so concerned about accumulating money and business. Excuse me. Jesus also undermined a first century form of prosperity gospel himself with the story of the rich man in Mark 10:17-31. This is the guy who claimed to have fulfilled all the commandments according to the law. Hi again. According to the law, and asked Jesus, what should he do now? He wants to know how he can be saved. Jesus told him to go sell all his possessions, give the money to the poor, and then he will have treasure in heaven. Then he can go and follow Jesus. Can you see any of those word of faith people doing that? Anyway, the guy left in disappointment. Then Jesus turned to the disciples and gave this lesson. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. Now, needles were bigger, needle eyes, they were bigger back then, but it would still be a tight fit. There is so much in the Bible that contradicts all of prosperity gospel and its misinterpretations in all its forms, like word of faith. There are pages and hours of it online, and I'll link some in the description. I'd like to end with 2 points to demonstrate the irreconcilable contradictions between the prosperity gospel heresy and the true gospel message of Jesus. First, ask yourself, can you see Jesus acting like or even condoning the actions of any of those word of faith televangelists with their fraud and financial crimes, preying on people and stealing their money? And lastly, the words of Jesus himself in Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters. You cannot serve God and wealth. This has been an Interfaith Chaplain Explains, and thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy.